As you remember, when I was talking about future casting, the first thing I mentioned was thinking about social science and people. And what I push my students, when I push the people who I work with to say, it's always about people. Everything we do is about people. It begins and ends with people. And it might have technologies and processes and procedures and money and all that stuff, but that's fine. But it's about people and it's about the human impact. And I think we lose sight of that. When people say, oh, the future of AI or the future of this or what's that? It's like, well, no, what's the future of people as they are affected by these things?
Welcome to Knowing Me, Knowing You, the podcast for the future of wealth management. Thanks for being here. I'm Marla Sofer. Money is a tool. It empowers people. Let's dive into how technology is personalizing advice, strengthening connections, and creating lasting impact. If you're an advisor looking to differentiate, a fintech leader shaping the next wave, or a client ready to take control of your financial future, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to the Knowing Me, Knowing You podcast, the Know Me podcast, where we explore the art and science of discovery to build meaningful connections in financial planning. Brian David Johnson is a world-renowned futurist, author, and visionary thinker. He spent his career not only imagining the future, but also helping individuals, businesses, and governments shape it in really meaningful ways. As Intel's very first futurist and professor of practice at Arizona State University, and now a senior fellow at Futurist, Brian pioneered the concept of future casting, threat casting, and science fiction prototyping, blending cutting-edge technology trends with relatable human narratives. His work challenges us to think beyond the present, empowering us to create a future that enhances human experiences and societal well-being. In this episode, I'm very pleased to welcome Brian to hear how his insights into emerging technologies and human behavior help us prepare for the future, whether it's understanding the evolving role of AI, the power of storytelling and innovation, or how we all play a role in shaping what's next. Brian, BDJ, welcome to the Knowing Me, Knowing You podcast. I'm thrilled that you're here.
I'm so happy to be here, Marla. Looking forward to our chat.
Me too. So we'll start off with what excites you about the current moment. It's a really big question, but if you can kind of just hone in on where we are right now in the present as it relates to what's most exciting for you, what would that be?
So for myself as a futurist and as an applied futurist, and I've been doing this for about 30 years, I think what gets me really excited is how excited, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively, people are about the future. Meaning, for me, the more people can think about the future, the more they can plan for the future. I think the more people feel like they have some sort of agency to kind of plan and get involved with their future. And I'm seeing it with governments and military, with private industry, certainly my students at ASU. All of them sort of feel very focused on the future and kind of where things are going. And that gets me very excited because, again, having done this for a long time, before I'd joke with people in the press and say, my title on my business card should say not just futurist, but okay futurist. Because what people would do when they heard I was a futurist, they would go, okay futurist, let's talk. And that skepticism is going away. And that gets me really excited because the more people we can get thinking about and taking action to build their future, the better.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Do you think the skepticism was in the role of a futurist or a skepticism just because they didn't want to really think about or talk about the future?
I think it was both. So before, the academic tradition that I come from is called long-term strategic foresight. That's not as catchy as futurist. And so that, I think, sounded a little more adult and nobody really was calling themselves futurists. And many of the people who did were kind of charlatans and snake oil salesmen and people who were not that great. And I'm an engineer, and so much of what I do is based on data and all that type of stuff. So I think more and more over the last couple of decades, you have more and more futurists coming out who are actually doing real work and actually having real impact on businesses or governments or militaries, things like that. So I think there's that just over the years. And then the other is I do believe that as we moved from the 20th century into the 21st century, there was a smugness in the 20th century, right? Cold War was over. We were moving forward. We could plan. We could have a long-term strategic plan. This is what we were going to do. And as we moved into the 21st century, things got a little crazy, right? When it came to technology, when it came to some of the recessions, certainly being going through a pandemic, a lot of things started happening that unsettled people enough to know that they needed to prepare for the future much more. And they weren't this sort of smug, oh, I've got a 5-year plan. I've got a 10-year plan. Before now, I think people understand that those things can change really rapidly and you need to be flexible to deal with them.
I love that. And it sounds like you approach it also and establish credibility by saying, I'm an engineer. I base what I do as a futurist on data and I'm taking an adult approach to it. So I want to learn a little bit, if you don't mind, about future casting and how future casting blends social science, technology, and trends. How was this approach born and what is its impact?
So future casting was born out of engineering. So it was very much, I was creating platforms. They were interactive television platforms, or back in the early 2000s, I was one of those crazy people who said we would use the internet to watch television. And so the idea of saying, okay, well, what does that look like? At the Intel Corporation, I had to write a specification for the chip, and it takes them 10 years to make a chip. So future casting is generative. So it doesn't make predictions. It says, I want to look 10 years out. I want to think about where we want to be. What are the possibilities, right? You can't, not fiction. What's the range of possible futures that you want to get to? And those are informed by, just as you said, social science, technology research, cultural history is really important. Who you are and where you're from really matters. Geopolitics and economics, as well as cultural trends, and even subject matter experts. So experts in the area, people who have accomplished separate things. And all of those are the inputs that kind of get you out and say, okay, here's the future I want. Could be the future of TV, could be the future of your financial future. Doesn't matter. So you think about all that and then you backcast. You turn around and say, okay, well, if that's where we want to go, what are the steps we need to take today, tomorrow, 5 years from now to get there? And what are the indicators along the way? And for me, it was really born out of the development of smart TV. So how do we actually go and make this chip? And then what's that market look like? Who do we need to partner with? Who do we need to work with over time? And it was very much not only doing engineering, but building a market, working with people, partnering together, being able to communicate that not only to CEOs, but also to average people to see if they would want it.
So when you're thinking about this, where we want to go or where we need to go, and thinking about this faraway history when it was just kind of a sparkle in someone's eye that we might watch TV on the internet, how are you thinking about maintaining human centricity? How do we know that we're advancing for the sake of progress in a way that is productive or in some way improving human lives and not just advancing for the sake of progress without some linkage back to humanity?
Marla, this is why I love talking to you. This is the center of everything that I do. Many people who know me, I'm a technological futurist, I'm a nerd, I'm a geek, I am. But oftentimes people will say about me, well, you're a technological futurist that cares more about people than technology. And that is exactly it. As you remember when I was talking about future casting, the first thing I mentioned was thinking about social science and people. And what I push my students, when I push the people who I work with to say, it's always about people. Everything we do is about people. It begins and ends with people. And it might have technologies and processes and procedures and money and all that stuff between it. That's fine. But it's about people and it's about the human impact. And I think we lose sight of that. When people say, oh, the future of AI or the future of this or what's that? It's like, well, no, what's the future of people as they are affected by these things? Because we have to keep humans at the center, because if we don't, it's very bad things happen. Very, very bad things happen. And that's what I'm always pushing people to do, to, using that as the grounding force to say, who is using this tool, this technology, this thing? Who are they using it with or on? Who is gaining the benefit? And so I always quantify all of the work that I do with the human impact that it has.
That's such an interesting point. You know what comes to mind for me, just kind of being a bit of a fintech geek, is crypto. So I have long been in the world of financial operations and was a very early believer in blockchain as it relates to, I personally have been involved in, I don't even know how many billions and billions of dollars of claims just because ledgers didn't talk to each other. So how brilliant it would be if we just had a better ledgering system and kind of immutable way that we know what actually happened. But I think that it was challenged a lot because of the utility to humans. I think that question kept coming up and thinking about, okay, this is great tech, but for what purpose? So that's kind of what first struck me when you said that.
And I think that's the moment we find ourselves in. I think you couldn't be more right with crypto. Crypto was a really fascinating technology, right? And looking at blockchain, and again, I'm a nerd and you're a nerd too. So like you get into it and you're like, whoa, look at what you can do. But to the point, it's like, okay, well, what are we going to do with it? Like, what is the thing? And that's how technologies evolve, right? I mean, as you start to go through and do those things, that's what, when I was at the Intel Corporation, so much of what we were doing could be around big data, could be around artificial intelligence, could be around self-driving self-driving cars, all those different things to say, okay, it's really cool technology, but again, what's that human impact? And also, what does it mean to people? I talk with my students is that there's kind of three layers when you think about these future of technologies and the impact. Like, number one is it technologically possible? That's the first thing. And that's what you're talking about right now. The next is, do people want it? Like, is it something that they're interested in? I think that's the impact, like you were saying. But then the third layer is probably the most important one is, will they pay for it? How will we pay for it? What are the economics of it? Because, you can get in your Wayback Machine and go back to like digital music back when that was like a new thing. And we had something called Napster, right? So technologically we could do it. We had this company called Napster. People loved it, but turns out it was illegal. And so it was bad. So it wasn't economically viable. I think you create these layers, but it generally builds in that way. And I think that's the moment we find ourselves with so many technologies now is, does it work? What is the human impact? And then how does it grow up and become a big girl technology, a big boy technology that can actually pay for itself?
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like people won't pay unless it gives them value. So it links right back to your number two. Number 2 and 3 are very intrinsically woven together. I'm sure this comes up a lot for you recently. I want to kind of touch into a little bit of AI and science fiction. Mm-hmm. And I'm very curious for your thoughts on this new, broader familiarity with AI and growing, I think, fear around AI and its potential and its greatest risks. So I wonder if you can offer an answer. We can talk about AI first and then maybe like go into science fiction. But I'm also curious for a perspective on AI and money, AI and kind of our financial lives. And any thoughts you have on that overlap?
So it's great that you brought that up because, AI was really born in science fiction. It lived in science fiction. It lived in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and all the way up through the 20th century. And it was only real until we got to kind of mid-century moving forward. So we should totally talk about that. So for me with AI, and I've been working with AI for almost 30 years, we're at a really interesting moment with AI. So it's got a legacy of coming out of science fiction. Well, we have to remember science fiction is about selling tickets and selling books. And the darker you make it and the worse you make it, the more books you sell and the more movies, right? If everything's all great and nothing happens, it's the most boring movie ever. And so there's this legacy that AI has of negativity, right? We open the pod bay doors at HAL, right? It's the hellscape of the Terminator. All that comes in. So that is how AI came into the room, right? So we have to remember that. And then for the longest time, you had to have a computer science degree to work on it, right? That's why working with Intel and working with IBM and a lot of other people who I did work with, these were crazy smart computer scientists, right? And then the thing that happened with ChatGPT and these LLMs and things like that is it started to shift. You didn't have to have a PhD. You just needed a computer and a connection. You have 13-year-olds being able to use it. And it's starting to do things, right? And not really understanding how it's doing things. And that's one of the things about ChatGPT and a lot of the LLMs and the generative AIs now is that the way that you interact with them is you don't understand how it's working, right? And that, I think, starts to have some fear because remember, Terminator hellscape, and then now the Terminator hellscape is on your computer and you're not exactly sure how it's doing and what it's doing. And then you have people talking about it in the media around, well, what is the future of AI? Is it going to go? What's it going to do? And going back to what we said before, if we're just talking about AI, we're having the wrong conversation, right? I tell people it's about the human impact. I just wrote a book on AI for kids called Everything You Need to Know About AI. And what I write in that and what I tell my students is AI is not going to take your job. A human using AI is going to take your job. And we need to understand that. And that sets a context for kind of understanding the world. So when it comes to money, that to me becomes super personal, right? When it comes to somebody messing with your money, it's like that's somebody messing with your family. That's somebody messing with your livelihood, your family's livelihood, your community's livelihood. And that to me is where the hazard gets really, really high with AI. And I'm fortunate enough to work in fintech and do a lot of work with different sort of larger companies and being able to see the care at which they keep that because they understand that. But then I go back to people and say, be careful when you're working with these new technologies, you as an individual and what you tell them, because you're not just telling the AI, you're telling to the person who's going to use the AI and who has the data set. So you need to be really, really careful. And so that to me is something that's really, really important is understanding what's going on behind the scenes.
What if financial planning wasn't just about numbers, but about you, your values, your goals, your vision for the future? Nomi is transforming client discovery for wealth managers, going beyond assets and risk scores to uncover what truly matters. With behavioral insights and real-time data, Nomi helps advisors personalize advice, build deeper connections, and grow their businesses. Because the best financial decisions start with knowing you. Discover the future of client engagement at Nomi.com. Really interesting. And I've had several conversations with my kids. So I've got a freshman in college and a senior in high school, basically telling them, don't know what to tell you to study. I think that you should study what you like and be really familiar with AI. I think new jobs are going to be invented. It's not just those that use the AI. There's going to be entirely new roles that we don't even know what they are right now.
You couldn't be more right. And that's what I tell my students. And then I just did a book tour in Australia I actually talked to like 8-year-olds about AI, and which is great. And that's why I actually wanted to write the book and have these conversations, because you can't BS. You've got to talk straight language. You got to tell them what they can do. And you can't be pessimistic, because then you're a jerk. Who's going to be a jerk to an 8-year-old? Like, don't do that. And so having those conversations, and that's what I tell them, is that number one is to always be curious. Like, especially with AI, or especially with what can be done, to always be curious to understand what's going on. You don't have to become a computer scientist, but understand what it's doing and why it's doing it. And even if it frightens you, be curious about that. Why? Why am I frightened about this? And dig into it. The other part is to intensely be human, because AI will never be human. It's software. It's just software that's trained by people on data. That's all it is. It's not human. And so always be the best human you can be, like you said. But then the final one is to be able to communicate. And this, I think, is so incredibly important. Humans being able to talk to other humans, being able to tell each other stories, to be able to get your point across, I think is so incredibly important. And we're still going to need that, because again, AI going off and doing all its stuff by itself, that's fine. It doesn't matter. It's only when it affects us as humans. We're the ones who are in this world right now. And I think making sure that we keep that at the center is important.
So I think I flopped a little bit on the intro. And so I'm going to redo the intro and just suggest, here's what I didn't say, and I probably should have said, is that the way we met was I found your book, Future You, and I read the book and saw, wow, this is very much a book about what I'm building, the software I'm building, we had never met each other, but I had already kind of been a year and a half into my journey. And I thought, oh my goodness, here is this guy, BDJ, that has the exact same perspective on the importance of envisioning your future in order to make it happen as many behavioral finance professionals and psychologists who are teaching financial planners and advisors about exactly what you just said about communication. How do I make sure that I am more able to effectively communicate my vision so that I am then able to make the right decisions, not only financial, but about my life day in and day out, that helps me to achieve what it is that I deem valuable and purposeful and meaningful to live my best life. That's how we initially connected, was that I just thought, oh my goodness, I have to know you, and reached out blindly, and you accepted. And I was so grateful. Thank you for taking my blind LinkedIn outreach. It was delightful for me. I want to come back to a topic here, the communication part and the money part. So to me, the words money and trust are interchangeable. The entire concept of money is a concept of trust. And you think about AI and the power it might have to help us communicate in order to make better choices. And I think people are really going back to how AI comes into this mix and how the future kind of plays a role in how this is going to change. How can we make sure all of this is done on this basis of trust when what we're talking about is so personal?
Well, and so many of the people that I do work with in fintech and finance and with banks will tell you, I will talk to bank CEOs and they'll say, BDJ, I don't deal with money at all. My job is trust. That's all I do. All I'm working on is trust. You either trust me, you trust the bank, you trust the financial system, you trust the people, that everything that you're doing is setting a bar of trust. And I think that's the bar with which we should judge AI. We should judge technologies. We should judge, do we trust it? Why do we trust it? How do we trust it? Does it help me trust somebody else, right? Is it informing me to trust somebody? I mean, there's all those reasons to understand that what we're talking about is trust. And it's trust between people. It's trust between people with organizations, or people with banks, or people with different systems. But I think if we remember that it's about that sets a much, much higher bar. And I think that makes it become much more effective.
That makes a lot of sense. I think that it's unfortunate that I feel the financial industry, we have trust in some ways. When you put money in a bank, I think people have to trust that they'll be able to take that money out. Where there's a gap in trust today, and this is where I want to talk a little bit about innovation, is where people have felt sometimes that they have been exposed to a conflict of interest. They were sold a product that didn't serve them, but it certainly served the financial institution that sold it. And so there is a level of distrust in the financial industry. In fact, the research shows that 98% of financial brands are distrusted. And so I might trust them from an information security perspective at the very highest levels. I trust that they're not going to leak my data to somebody else because I know that they're investing very heavily in that. But I don't necessarily trust that the products they sell me are the right products for me. And I don't trust that when they sell them to me, they're not selling me ones that they are benefiting from as opposed to ones that might not be the best for me. I don't know if that was phrased properly. So anyway, when it comes to kind of finding that human centricity in innovation, I'm curious how you see the interplay between the constituents that you serve most, the governments, the businesses, the humans that are using all of those services, working together to have an approach that continues to build trust using the technology, hopefully for better outcomes.
Yeah, I think it's that interchange. And because when you were talking, I was like, when you talk about the systems, the technologies, the AI, and when we say the systems, right, it's always a complex system. It's not just around one piece of technology or whatever. There's all these other things, right? There's the 5G and 6G networks. There's a lot of things that are going on behind it. So really, we're talking about these very complex systems of systems. And we start talking about trust. And do you trust that? What I think could be really interesting, and I've talked about this before, is we can think about all these technologies and all these systems being an extension of our humanity. That if we're building them correctly, like you said, on a basis of trust, that the more you interact with it, the more you will trust it. Because part of how you build trust, and again, I'm not a social scientist, I'm not a psychologist or anything like that, but I work with a lot of them. And the idea being that you build trust over time. Trust, built into that trust is resiliency. So like when you go to your bank and you go to the ATM and you try to take out $20 and it doesn't work, and you know you have $100, it doesn't work. Now you don't instantly think that the bank has gone bankrupt and all the money is gone. Generally, because you've worked with them enough, you trust, oh, there's something weird at the ATM or there's something weird with my card or whatever. And there's resiliency that then gets built into that because it's sort of trust over time. So I think that's part of it, is sort of instantiating into the systems the humanity of what businesses are. And it's not brands. It's much more, it's deeper than that. And then adding to that, there's trust over time. I think trust over time is really important.
That makes sense because I see this interaction between the more interaction, it's also a validation of the value you're receiving. If you're not receiving value, you're not going to keep coming back. And so as that interaction goes up, it's because you're getting something out of it. You're getting something each time you come in. Looking ahead, what is one thing, and I know this might be hard to whittle down to, but one thing that you really hope to see humanity achieve in the next 20 years?
For me, it goes back to the book Future You that you mentioned, which is why we first connected. And it's why I wrote the book. I'll do the opposite of what I don't want to see, because people ask me that all the time. Being a threat caster who does work, big scary things like with NATO, thinking about, emerging disruptive technologies and weapons of mass destruction, right? It's not really light stuff. My wife says I'm the worst person to be at a barbecue because they're like, oh, BDJ, what are you working on? Oh, emerging disruptive technologies and weapons of mass destruction. Oh, okay. But people ask me, what do I worry about? Like, what keeps me up at night? And it goes back to this idea as when people lose their agency, where they feel like they don't have control. They feel like they don't have control over their futures, that they can't see their futures. They've given up on being able to do that. And the worst thing is when they have given over the control of their future to somebody else, because that's the worst thing ever. And you see it all the time. You see people doing it. You see, even in the media, people pushing you, taking away your agency when people kind of say, here's all this bad stuff. It's like, well, okay, what do we do about it? Like, how do you sort of keep that empowerment? So to me, the thing that I think is incredibly important is being able to create this atmosphere of agency where everybody feels like they have their ability to shape their own future, to shape the future of their families and their communities, to be able to envision that future, which is what the Future You was all about, and then feel like they have the steps to get there. They have the tools, they have the technologies, they have what they need to get there. That to me is incredibly important, because if we have that agency and everybody else is supporting everybody else's agency, then everything else rises, because we're trying to make life better. We're trying to do things better, right? We're not pulling away people's agency, which takes it down.
If you have to compare between today and 20 years from now, do you feel that our agency is the reason that it's keeping you up at night because you feel that our agency is being threatened, or it's because we have an opportunity to improve it? I don't know if that's a fair question.
I have the worst answer. I'm an optimist. So I'm an optimist. And the reason why I'm an optimist is, as we talked before, I've been doing this for 30 years and I do 10 years out. So I've seen what I do happen. So we talked about smart TV. There's a lot of other things that's happened. Like it's actually happened. My big goal in life is to impress my wife. That's really the only thing I like to do. So during the pandemic, we were watching Netflix and she turned to me and said, "Thank you." And I said, "Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm good." So the idea then being that I've seen it happen. So that makes me an optimist because I've seen that we do have the ability to shape our future. And even in the threat casting work, I've seen people kind of go through and do that. So that makes me an optimist. And I'm always an optimist because it's a decision that you make. It's not a naturally occurring event. Optimism and pessimism, they're a decision. And I decide to be an optimist because I firmly believe that we need to get together and work together and make a better future. And we need to define what better future is. We need to define those things. But that's really, really important. And that makes me an optimist because I've seen it. And so that's why when I say the things that keep me up at night is that state of people not doing that. And I don't really believe right now that we're in sort of one way or the other. It's always this sort of constant nagging thing because I know the more people who feel empowered, the better things are going to be. The more people who feel disempowered and however, things always go poorly. And I think that's the thing that I'm always keeping an eye on and wrestling with. And it changes every day.
So you were interested when we first connected in what Nomi is building as it relates to really unpacking the values that are driving people's vision of the future, what we call, it's a discovery, a financial discovery, and helping to codify the information that the financial industry is going to need to better serve their clients. I'm just curious, what might have sparked your interest in that and how it links maybe back to like this optimistic approach of when we have agency, when we are able to actually define it, we can then achieve it.
Well, so much about the future you and so much about the work that I do, again, is giving people that ability to say, well, okay, what's the future I want? And what's the future I want to avoid? And then to get really pragmatic about what that looks like. And what really interested me about the work that you're doing is creating platforms and software and the ability for people to do that. And so again, that goes back to anything that allows people to have power and agency to then go make decisions about what they want to do and then be able to kind of go and do it. I always find that very interesting, whether that be a book or a piece of research or a company or technology. That to me is, I think, incredibly important and incredibly interesting.
Oh, thank you. I love that. So this is our last question. What is one instance in your life or a conversation that you had that totally changed your own personal relationship with money?
It was with my father. So my dad is an engineer, Minnesota farm boy, went into the Army, got out of the Army, was a radar tracking engineer for the FAA, came from nothing. And it was very, very early on. He was very frugal. My father ended up being very, very successful. And it was very early on being able for him to say what financial health looks like and the importance of financial health as early as possible. So one of the things we didn't talk about in my background is that I started going to the local community college when I was 10 years old. This would have been back in the 80s when I wanted to learn Fortran and my parents didn't know what to do with me. So they sent me to the local school. And while I was there, I had free time. And so I started working in the computer lab. So I thought that was normal. I thought all 10-year-olds went and took college classes and then worked in computer labs and taught people how to use these crazy thing called personal computers, right? So I was walking around. And so I did it. And I didn't realize that wasn't normal. And I thought I kind of dreamed it. And so I was talking to my dad once about it. And my dad smiled and he's the most nice guy, got up and left the room. This was many years later. And he came back and he had all my timesheets and he had all the money that I had made and he had invested it. And so he very early on had that conversation about financial health, but then he had also followed up with it. And it's still there. It's still in my portfolio. It's still this little thing that kind of came from that 10-year-old. But for me, it was my dad having an understanding because we were always futures looking the importance of doing it. And if you can do it early and then let it run and stick to the plan, that it was so incredibly important. And he couldn't have been more right.
Oh, that's amazing. What a beautiful story. And making your first future investment at 10 is, that's phenomenal. BDJ, this conversation has been wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your insights on future casting and science fiction and technology and the human side of innovation. It's super clear that the future isn't something we wait for. We actively shape it. And there is a process and a way to make it happen, whether it's AI or long-term planning or just getting more optimistic about what it is that we want to envision in our future. You definitely have reminded us that our decisions influence the world of tomorrow. So if today's discussion sparked curiosity, start by asking yourself, what kind of future do you want to create? Whether you're an individual, an advisor, a business leader, a government employee, getting very clear about your future, it gives you the power to have agency over its creation. So BDJ, if you have anything that you want to share about where our listeners can find more, if there's somebody who's in the market for a great book for their children on AI, where can they find your book and how can they learn more?
I am infinitely searchable. So that's the thing. Brian David Johnson, BDJ. You can go in any search engine that you want to use. You can also find me on LinkedIn. But all the stuff I try to publish as much as I can and put out as much as I can and talk to as many interesting people as possible. So that's always the best way to find me.
Fantastic. And for our listeners, what is one trend or technology that you're most excited or concerned about? Drop it in the comments or DM me. Thanks again. Thank you for joining us on the Knowing Me, Knowing You podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Your support helps us bring more transformative conversations to you. Until next time, keep discovering, keep growing, and remember, you're in control of your own financial story. Follow us for more conversations on financial confidence, self-discovery, and the future of money.